They thought I was just an intern. By the time they found out who I really was, it was already too late. The morning light hit the glass towers of Wall Street like molten gold, but inside the 28th floor of Hudson Capital Partners, the air was cool, sharp, and perfumed with the scent of ambition. Olivia Grant sat at the far end of a sleek marble boardroom table, her hair pulled into a neat low bun, a navy target blazer draped over her shoulders, and a worn leather portfolio resting across her lap. Around her, 6 other interns, each armed with Ivy League credentials, shifted in their seats. They exchanged glances, their whispers laced with the smugness of people who believed they were already halfway to the corner office. Richard Collins, Senior Vice President of Operations, strolled in with a coffee mug in one hand and a phone in the other. He didn't bother looking at her as he slid a stack of onboarding paperwork across the table. His voice was silk, wrapped around steel. "Look what HR dragged in. Did you even graduate college?" The words drew a couple of quiet laughs from the far side of the table. One intern, a tall guy in a Harvard sweatshirt, smirked into his phone. Olivia could see the faint reflection of herself on his screen, live-streamed to someone. Richard took a deliberate sip of coffee, then stumbled theatrically. The mug tipped, sending a wave of scalding liquid across the polished mahogany. The amber tide stopped just short of her blazer, but the corner of her resume, crisp, cream-colored, darkened with spreading stains. "Might want to clean that up before the real meeting starts," he said, the grin not reaching his eyes. Olivia's face didn't change. She picked up the paperwork, scanning it as if the insult and the coffee were nothing more than background noise. In truth, her mind was already cataloging every detail: date, time, witnesses, tone, expressions. This wasn't humiliation. It was data. When the meeting broke, Richard waved her toward the hallway. "Since you're new, let's start you with something simple. Go down to the archives, the basement, file room B." His tone was condescending, but her expression remained serene. "Of course," she said. The elevator ride down was silent except for the faint hum of fluorescent lights. When the doors opened, the air was cooler, tinged with dust and old paper. The storage room was vast, filled with rows of beige metal cabinets. She ran her fingers lightly over a drawer labeled Client Contracts, 2018. A thin smile touched her lips. This wasn't busy work. This was opportunity. She'd requested this exact access, under the guise of helping with filing, because the file room wasn't just a graveyard for paper. Behind a locked cabinet marked Authorized Personnel Only was the auxiliary server system Hudson used for cold storage. Few people remembered it existed. From her bag, she withdrew a slim external hard drive disguised as a portable phone charger. With practiced ease, she slipped the drive into her pocket and unlocked the cabinet with a master key card she'd had for years, back when she used to visit this building under entirely different circumstances. The screen blinked to life with a low whir. Years of internal memos, archived financial records, and client correspondence unfurled before her in directories and subfolders. She wasn't stealing, yet. She was mapping. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "You don't know me, but Richard is planning something. Watch your back." As Olivia's thumb hovered over the reply button, she typed 2 words: "I'm ready." By the time she emerged back into the elevator, she had committed the server layout to memory. Every asset she needed was now a matter of timing. She stepped out into the lobby just as the Harvard intern finished another hushed commentary into his phone, his gaze flicking to her like she was something to be brushed off a lapel. Olivia met his eyes briefly, just long enough for him to shift uncomfortably. He didn't know why, not yet. For now, she was just the intern nobody wanted. But the clock was already ticking. The second morning arrived with the same chill of late winter sliding through the canyons of Wall Street, the wind snaking between skyscrapers like a thief. Olivia stood at the intersection of Broadway and Pine, scarf drawn close to her jawline, waiting for the light to change. The Hudson Capitol building loomed ahead, 30 stories of glass and authority. Inside, the lobby buzzed with its usual early rush. Assistants juggling leather folios, brokers with their heads bent over glowing screens, a courier wheeling in a dolly stacked with packages. Olivia swiped her intern badge through the turnstile. The red light blinked before flashing green. A 1-second hesitation that would have made another newcomer nervous. She let it pass without a flicker in her stride. Richard Collins was waiting at her desk. He didn't knock. He didn't smile. His voice carried that same condescending timbre that had marked every interaction so far. "Grant, right? I need you to make a coffee run. 4 cappuccinos, triple shot each. 2 oat milk, 1 almond, 1 whole milk, extra hot, and a matcha latte for Rachel on the 13th floor. Oh, and they all need to be in separate carriers. The lid labels should be in Sharpie, black, not blue. Think you can handle that without spilling?" Olivia tilted her head slightly. "Of course. Anything else?" He thought for a moment, clearly fishing for ways to make it more inconvenient. "Yes. The cappuccinos should be from Perch Coffee on the other side of Battery Park. Rachel's matcha from Greenleaf on Fulton, and I need them back before the 9:30 equity call." "You've got 22 minutes. It was a logistical impossibility unless she sprinted, which was the point. A setup to fail. She took the list without protest, her pen gliding across a small notepad. She wrote each detail with meticulous clarity. Time assigned, specific locations, names of recipients, milk preferences. Underneath, she added, "Witness, Michael Torres, desk opposite. Observed instruction. Evidence needed a paper trail, even for petty hazing." Out on the street, she walked briskly, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. The coffee run wasn't wasted time, it was reconnaissance. Her real assignment was to absorb every corner of this company's operational culture, and that meant cataloging both the overt and the subtle. Richard's instruction wasn't just demeaning, it was inefficient, risking delays in essential meetings. Poor workflow decisions at senior levels often pointed to deeper rot. At Perch Coffee, the barista recognized the order. "Oh, Collins again. Always triple shots like he's compensating for something," she joked, sliding the steaming cups into the carrier. Olivia smiled faintly but didn't comment. Names and faces went into her mental ledger. At Greenleaf, the line stretched to the door. She checked her watch. 9:14. A young man in a navy windbreaker stepped in behind her, glancing at her portfolio. "Hudson Capital?" he asked. She nodded, neutral. "Why?" He hesitated, then extended his hand. "Ethan Morales. I used to work there. Operations analyst." There was a pause. "Used to?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, his tone dry. "Got told I didn't fit the culture, which is polite for we can't have someone asking why the minority hires never make it past mid-level before getting mysteriously written up." Olivia studied his face. There was no bitterness in his expression, only a quiet resolve. "Did you ever take it to HR?" He gave a short laugh. "HR works for them, not for us. Besides, I didn't have hard evidence, just stories. But if you're smart, you keep your eyes open." "Hudson looks shiny from the outside, but—" He trailed off, shaking his head. Her order was called. She took the matcha and turned to him. "Thank you, Mr. Morales." "How do you know my name?" She lifted the cup slightly, a ghost of a smile. "You just told me." And she walked out. By the time she returned, it was 9:29. She placed each drink on the designated desks with precision. Richard looked up, expecting her to be flustered and late. Instead, she stood at his desk, her notebook open. All beverages delivered. Perch order time stamped at 9:05, Greenleaf at 9:18. No spills. Sharpie labels in black as requested. She closed the notebook. Would you like me to log these errands as part of operational task records for Q1? He blinked. What? Standard practice in several firms, she said smoothly. Non-billable intern tasks can be recorded for internal efficiency audits. If coffee runs are taking over 20 minutes, it might indicate workflow inefficiency, especially if the request involves multiple vendors. Tracking that could help optimize. That won't be necessary, he cut in, his tone sharp. Noted. She returned to her desk, but as she sat, she discreetly sent herself an encrypted email. Coffee run, 22 minutes, multi-location, ordered by SVP. Witness, Torres. Barista comment, recurring order pattern. Every piece mattered. Mid-morning, she reviewed an internal memo on the shared drive about Q4 operational budgets. In the margin of the scanned PDF, a faint handwritten note read, Adjust margin to 21.7% before submission. It was initialed RC. Her fingers hovered over the trackpad. Adjusting a margin percentage after numbers were finalized wasn't inherently illegal, but if it altered the narrative of a quarter's performance before shareholder review, it was at minimum unethical. She made a mental note to cross-reference with archived financial statements once she had access again to the auxiliary servers. At noon, she took her lunch in the small plaza outside the building. The January air bit at her cheeks, but the relative quiet helped her think. Ethan Morales' offhand comment about culture fit wasn't just anecdotal, it was pattern recognition. If she could corroborate it with staff turnover data segmented by demographics, she could weave a direct line from biased culture to quantifiable corporate damage. She finished her sandwich, then pulled a slim, leather-bound planner from her bag. Inside, her notes were organized into columns. Date, incident, actor, type, bias, inefficiency, policy breach, potential evidence, corroboration needed. Coffee run details were there, alongside yesterday's coffee spill incident, the Harvard interns live stream, and the memo margin note. The page for potential allies now had two names, Samuel Ortiz, security, and Ethan Morales, former employee. Under each, she wrote possible roles they could play. Samuel, access to internal camera archives. Ethan, external testimony and prior case examples. At 2:00 p.m., Richard passed her desk again, dropping a stack of printed schedules. Meeting room 3 in 5 minutes. Bring these. It turned out to be a floor-wide briefing on an upcoming client pitch. Richard, standing at the front, went over presentation slides in rapid-fire jargon. Olivia's gaze swept the room, department heads, analysts, interns. She noted who deferred to Richard and who seemed quietly skeptical. Mapping alliances was as important as gathering documents. After the meeting, she returned to her desk, opening a blank spreadsheet under the innocuous file name Intern Task Log. In reality, it was a coded record of everything she'd observed so far. She used a cipher method that replaced key names and terms with neutral substitutes. If anyone opened it, they'd see nothing more than time logs and vague descriptors. At 5:45 p.m., most of the floor cleared. Olivia stayed behind under the pretense of finishing filing work. She timed her move perfectly. Security sweeps on the 28th floor happened every 47 minutes, and she knew Samuel Ortiz would be on the 600th round. When he appeared, she gave a casual nod. Slow night? Always is until someone forgets their badge or decides to sneak in a drink, he replied. Then lowering his voice, You met Morales? She didn't ask how he knew. Yes, he's solid, knows things, but be careful. Collins has a habit of finding out who talks to who, and he's been asking about you. I expected as much, she said. Samuel glanced toward the far end of the floor. If you need a secure drop for anything, west stairwell, under the third landing, no cameras there. Not one they know about anyway. Olivia looked at him steadily. Understood. By the time she left the building, the streets were slick with a light drizzle, neon reflections stretching across wet asphalt. She walked north toward the subway, her mind layering the day's events into her growing architecture of the case. Bias, overt humiliation tasks, targeted microaggressions, commentary about fitting culture. Inefficiency, senior staff assigning menial tasks with high opportunity cost. Financial irregularities, margin adjustment note in Q4 memo. Potential witnesses. Internal, Samuel Ortiz. External, Ethan Morales. Possible others in between. She didn't feel rushed. This wasn't about striking quickly. It was about tightening the net so that when it closed, there would be no escape. As she descended into the subway, the hum of the city surrounded her. Somewhere above, the Hudson Capitol Tower gleamed under the streetlights, oblivious to the fact that a storm was already forming from within. Tomorrow she would start pulling at threads only she could see. The next morning began with the muted hum of rain against the lobby's glass walls. Olivia stepped inside Hudson Capitol's atrium, water beading off her coat. She moved with her usual unhurried pace, scanning the room without appearing to. Security was stationed at the far end near the elevators. Samuel Ortiz stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing the navy blazer and earpiece of the building's private security team. He looked like any other guard, except for the way his eyes followed details most people missed. As she swiped her badge, Samuel nodded slightly, just enough to be noticed if you were looking for it. Most people never would. By mid-morning, Richard Collins had already found a reason to pull her aside. This time, it was to assist with moving a box of archived contracts to the compliance office on the 26th floor, a job better suited to a mailroom clerk than a finance intern. Olivia accepted without comment. In the freight elevator, she pressed the button for the 26th floor, but instead of riding straight up, she stepped out on 14. The security camera above the door was angled slightly away, just as Samuel had told her. A minute later, the man himself appeared from a side corridor. "You've got 5 minutes," Samuel said quietly. From inside his blazer, he pulled a folded sheet of paper and a small USB stick wrapped in tissue. "That's a map of the building's camera system. Red dots are live feeds management can access. Blue are the ones they think are broken but aren't. And the green ones?" He smiled faintly. "Those are mine." Olivia unfolded the paper. The green dots were sparse, 2 in stairwells, 1 in a sub-basement corridor, 1 near the freight entrance. Places where sensitive exchanges could happen without drawing attention. "You're giving me this why?" she asked, her voice neutral. "Because I've seen what they do to people who speak up," Samuel said. 2 years ago, a friend of mine in accounting found a pattern of expense fraud. She reported it to HR. A month later, she was fired for time card discrepancies. He handed her the USB. "These are the last 60 days of CCTV backups from my green feeds. I keep my own archive, off the company's servers. If Collins or anyone else tries to doctor footage, you'll have originals." She slipped the device into an inner pocket of her blazer. "And why trust me?" His expression was steady. "Because I remember seeing you walk through this building 3 years ago with Eleanor Grant. You weren't wearing an intern badge then. You were wearing a nameplate that had Grant Holdings Board of Directors on it. And you were standing at her right hand." Olivia didn't answer, but the corner of her mouth lifted slightly. Samuel's memory was sharper than she'd expected. They rode the rest of the way to the 26th floor in silence. At the compliance office, Olivia set the box down, thanked the clerk, and returned to her desk without incident. But inside, the chessboard in her mind had shifted. She now had a partner on the inside, someone with access to angles no one else saw. That afternoon, while others scrolled through their phones during the lull between meetings, Olivia used her access to the internal archive system to run a silent query on staff badge activity logs. Her screen filled with data, timestamps of entry and exit, floor access patterns. She cross-referenced Richard's activity with key moments she'd observed: the coffee spill incident, the altered margin note in the Q4 memo, the odd absences just before major client calls. Patterns emerged, small but telling. He spent an unusual amount of time on the 5th floor, which was officially just storage. Storage rarely required an SVP's personal visits. Her train of thought was interrupted by a soft ping. An internal chat window popped up on her screen. Samuel Ortiz. West stairwell, 3rd landing, 7:15 tonight. Alone. She typed back a single letter. K. The stairwell was dimly lit, smelling faintly of concrete and rain. Olivia arrived at 7:12, her heels silent on the steps. Samuel was already there, leaning against the wall. He handed her a small black envelope. "Audio file," he said. "From a meeting in the executive lounge 2 nights ago. Collins, head of HR, and the director of compliance. They were talking about you." Olivia slid the SD card into a pocket-sized recorder and pressed play. Richard's voice came through first, low but clear. "She's been poking around places she shouldn't. If we can catch her with something off-limits, say a restricted server or physical file, HR can process her out by Friday." Another voice, female, likely HR, said, "We'll need documented cause. No one's going to approve termination without evidence." Richard: "Then we create evidence. I'll leave a folder in the file room marked Confidential M&A Drafts. She won't be able to resist. Security will happen to check the cameras at the right time." Olivia stopped the playback. "So they're planning to bait me into an entrapment scenario." "Exactly," Samuel said. "And Collins has a contact in IT who'll discover the breach. They've done it before." She slipped the card back into its case. "Then we'll let them try. Only this time, they'll be walking into my setup, not the other way around." Samuel's mouth curved into a grin. "I like the sound of that." Over the next 2 days, Olivia crafted her counter. She visited the file room at staggered times, never touching the locked cabinet but always passing near it, ensuring she appeared on multiple camera angles. She let Richard see her there once, glancing up just as he turned the corner. His smirk told her the bait was set. Meanwhile, Samuel quietly rerouted the green feed cameras in the file room to record not only her presence, but also the moment Richard planted the so-called confidential folder. By Thursday, the trap was complete. That morning, as she stepped into the elevator, Richard joined her. "Busy day?" he asked, his tone mock casual. "Always," she replied, not looking at him. When they reached the 5th floor, he stepped out first. She followed at a measured pace, feeling the static of anticipation under her skin. In the file room, the cabinet door hung slightly ajar. A red folder sat inside, its label printed in bold, Confidential, M&A Drafts. She didn't touch it. She didn't even step closer. Instead, she took out her phone, pretending to check messages while the reflection in the glass cabinet showed Richard's figure lingering in the doorway. A faint green light blinked above the corner camera. Samuel's feed was live. She smiled to herself. That evening, Samuel delivered the edited video to her in the west stairwell. It showed everything. Richard placing the folder, checking the hallway, then returning hours later to find it untouched. His expression of mild annoyance was almost comical.
"Clean as it gets," Samuel said. "They've got nothing on you." "On the contrary," Olivia replied. "I've now got proof of attempted entrapment by a senior executive, and this is only the beginning." For the first time since she walked into Hudson Capital as just an intern, she felt the balance of the game tilt in her favor. The conference room on the 27th floor was a glass-walled fishbowl suspended over the Manhattan skyline. Morning sunlight flooded through the windows, bouncing off steel and glass, casting long reflections across the polished table. Olivia was the last intern to enter. Richard Collins was already at the head of the table, leaning casually against the back of a leather chair. A projector hummed behind him, displaying the Hudson Capital Partners logo on a pristine white screen. Around the table sat 15 people, analysts, department heads, and the entire intern cohort. A pot of coffee steamed at one end, flanked by neatly arranged pastries. Olivia took her seat quietly, pen poised over her notepad. Richard's smile was thin, predatory. "All right, everyone. Today we're going to have a little pop quiz. Let's see who's actually paying attention in this place." The interns exchanged uneasy glances. "This isn't in the training manual," one of them whispered. "That's the point," Richard said. His gaze landed squarely on Olivia. "We'll start with something basic. Olivia, explain the concept of ROI." She didn't even glance at her notes. Return on investment is a performance measure used to evaluate the efficiency of an investment or compare efficiencies between several investments. It's calculated by dividing the net profit by the initial cost of the investment, expressed as a percentage. A higher ROI indicates more favorable returns relative to cost. Richard's smile faltered for half a second before he recovered. "Fine. EBITDA? Earnings before interest. Taxes, depreciation, and amortization. It's a measure of core profitability, often used to compare companies without the distortion of non-operational expenses. However, it can also mask underlying cash flow issues if used in isolation." Several department heads shifted in their chairs. Richard picked up a printed quarterly report from the table and waved it slightly. "Since you're so confident, tell me what's wrong with this." He slid the paper down the table toward her. Olivia's eyes scanned the figures, columns of numbers marching neatly across the page. Then she saw it. The operating margin in Q4 had jumped from 18.9% to 21.7%, the same figure she'd seen in that handwritten margin note 2 days ago. The underlying revenue numbers, however, didn't support such a leap. She looked up, her voice even. "The margin improvement in Q4 isn't consistent with the revenue growth rate. Either operational costs dropped disproportionately, which there's no evidence for in the expense breakdown, or the margin was recalculated without adjusting the cost base. In short, this is either a reporting error or an intentional misstatement." A ripple went through the room. One of the analysts at the far end frowned and began flipping through his own copy of the report. Richard's tone sharpened. "Are you accusing this company of fraud?" "I'm identifying an inconsistency," Olivia replied smoothly. "If this were my client, I'd recommend an immediate reconciliation of operational costs against the original ledger entries. If it's a reporting error, it can be corrected before filing with the SEC. If not..." She let the sentence trail off. The silence was deafening. The Harvard intern who had live-streamed her earlier shifted uncomfortably, suddenly avoiding her eyes. Richard broke it with a scoff. "Anyone can play with numbers. Let's see how you handle something practical. Scenario: a client invests $5 million in a portfolio expected to yield $750,000 annually over 5 years. Calculate the ROI and tell me if it's worth the risk." Olivia didn't look away from him. Total returns over 5 years would be $3.75 million. ROI would be $3.75 million, $5 million, x 100 equaling 75%. Whether it's worth the risk depends on volatility, liquidity constraints, and comparative returns in alternative investments. Given current market conditions, I'd benchmark against the S&P 500's projected annualized return of 8 to 10%. This portfolio underperforms unless it offers significantly lower risk or strategic diversification benefits. This time, a department head actually raised an eyebrow in approval. Richard leaned back, feigning nonchalance. Not bad for someone who just runs coffee. The jab landed flat. Olivia's calm was unsettling precisely because it didn't match the humiliation he had intended. After the meeting broke, Olivia stepped into the hallway. Samuel Ortiz was stationed by the elevators, scanning ID badges as employees passed. Without looking directly at her, he murmured, "Half the floor's talking about what you said in there. Collins looks rattled." "That was the point," she said softly. "But this isn't just about embarrassing him." "The Q4 margin issue is bigger than I thought." Samuel's earpiece crackled, pulling him back into his duties. But before she walked away, he said quietly, "If you need ledger access, I know a night guard on the accounting floor. Let me know." Back at her desk, Olivia opened the company's internal finance portal, navigating to the Q4 reports. Access to original ledger entries was restricted, but she noted the file path and access permissions: 3 executives and 1 compliance officer. She minimized the window when Richard appeared behind her. "Grant, you've got an afternoon errand. Delivery to the legal department. Contracts folder, physical copy. Take the service elevator." It was unusual for him to personally hand her a manila folder. Unusual enough that she glanced at the security seal on the flap. Intact. Still, she felt the weight of the setup. The service elevator was empty except for a lone maintenance cart. As she descended, she pulled out her phone, angling it toward the folder. A faint reflection in the polished metal wall gave her a partial view of the label: Client Arbitration, Pending. She delivered it without incident, but her instincts were on high alert. The folder hadn't been planted for entrapment, at least not yet. More likely, it was a test of whether she'd tamper with legal documents. At 4:00 p.m., an all-hands email from Richard landed in every intern's inbox. Mandatory finance knowledge assessment. Tomorrow, 10:00 a.m. Conference room B. The subject line carried the faint scent of retaliation. That night, Olivia reviewed old cases from Grant Holdings where internal whistleblowers had uncovered discrepancies. The patterns were familiar: inflated quarterly margins just before investor calls, expense accounts adjusted retroactively, clerical errors that always favored the same senior executives. She wasn't ready to move yet, not until she had both the margin irregularity and the discrimination narrative in the same frame. Alone, each could be dismissed. Together, they would be undeniable. Her plan was forming. Tomorrow's assessment would be her stage, and she'd use it to raise a question so specific, so grounded in data, that Richard couldn't swat it away without implicating himself. The next morning, Conference Room B was set up with rows of chairs facing a projector screen. Richard stood at the front, sleeves rolled to his elbows, as if this were a casual seminar. On the table beside him were copies of balance sheets, income statements, and cash flow reports. "Today," he began, "we'll see who's got the analytical chops to make it in finance. No notes, no calculators, just your brain." The first few questions went to other interns, basic definitions, easy math. Then he called on Olivia. "Explain the difference between free cash flow and operating cash flow, and tell me which one you'd prioritize in valuing a leveraged buyout target." Olivia answered without hesitation. Operating cash flow measures cash generated from a company's core business operations. Free cash flow is operating cash flow minus capital expenditures, reflecting what's available for distribution to stakeholders or reinvestment. In valuing an LBO target, I'd prioritize free cash flow. It determines the company's ability to service acquisition debt while still providing returns. Richard smirked. Fine. Now take a look at this Q4 statement. Tell me what's off. She scanned the document. The same 21.7% margin figure leapt out at her, but this time something else. The depreciation schedule had been shortened from 7 years to 5, inflating net income artificially. Her voice was calm but carried across the room. Depreciation schedule changed mid-cycle without a corresponding asset revaluation. That's a GAAP violation unless formally disclosed, which it wasn't in this report. The effect is an inflated net income, which when combined with the margin change, materially misrepresents profitability. A quiet murmur ran through the analysts. One department head began jotting notes. Richard's jaw tightened. That's a serious accusation, Grant. It's an observation, she replied evenly. If this were my audit, I'd flag it for immediate review. And if the review confirmed both changes lacked disclosure, the SEC would classify it as a material misstatement. The silence this time was heavier. No one missed the way Richard's face paled. When the session ended, Olivia returned to her desk knowing she had just fired her first open shot. The whispers spreading through the floor were no longer about the new intern, but about the numbers in Hudson Capital's books. Richard might have called it a quiz. She had made it a warning. It began with a whisper. Late Tuesday afternoon, as most of the floor was buried in emails, Samuel Ortiz appeared at Olivia's desk under the guise of checking a loose Ethernet cable near her workstation. He crouched, fingers moving over the port, and spoke just above a breath. They're moving tonight. Olivia kept her eyes on her monitor. Details. Collins, HR, Director of Compliance. They met in the executive lounge at lunch. I've got the audio. Her pulse slowed instead of quickening. Time? Now, Samuel said. West stairwell. She rose casually, taking her phone and a folder as if heading to the copy room. In the stairwell, Samuel handed her a slim black recorder. She pressed play. Richard's voice, smooth with confidence. We've given her enough rope. Tomorrow around 9 a.m., I'll send her to File Room B, Cabinet 3. I'll leave a red folder labeled Confidential M&A Drafts. It'll have a few dummy contracts marked Restricted. When she touches it, we've got her. Security will happen to check the feed right then. A woman's voice, HR, cut in. We'll need her on camera with the folder open. Director of Compliance. I'll backdate a note for unauthorized access. She's gone by end of week. Olivia stopped the tape. They're predictable. Samuel's expression hardened. Predictable doesn't mean harmless. They've used this exact play before. One junior analyst didn't recover, blacklisted in the industry. She tucked the recorder away. Then we'll give them what they want. On my terms. That night, in her apartment, Olivia spread her notes across the table. The auxiliary server map, the ledger anomalies, the discrimination incidents, all threads of the same web. Now she'd add entrapment to the list. She drafted a plan in precise steps. Appear in File Room B at the exact time Richard expected. Let herself be recorded by both the company's cameras and Samuel's green feed system. Ensure Samuel's footage captured the moment Richard planted the folder earlier. Avoid touching the documents while making it seem like she might have. Secure time-stamped, unaltered footage proving the setup. To make it airtight, she'd also plant a counter trap, a micro-recorder hidden in her pocket to capture Richard's follow-up conversation afterward. If he gloated, it would be evidence of intent. She packed her bag for the morning with deliberate care. Portable charger disguised as a hard drive, encrypted phone, a fountain pen she'd once used in board meetings with her mother. A reminder, she was not the intern they thought she was. The morning unfolded like theater. At 8:57, Richard appeared at her desk, all false cheer. "Grant, I need you to pull an old client file for me. File room B, cabinet 3, top drawer. Says confidential M&A drafts." "Shouldn't take long." Olivia met his eyes with a neutral nod. On it. She walked the corridor at an unhurried pace, heels clicking against the tile. In the file room, fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The cabinet door was already ajar, just as planned. Inside, the red folder sat like a siren. She reached forward, not to touch it, but to rest her fingers on the cabinet edge, leaning in as if examining the label. The position was perfect for the company's camera to catch her in frame. Above, a second green light blinked. Samuel's feed. After 5 seconds, she straightened, pulled a different folder from a nearby shelf, and left the red one untouched. In the hallway, she passed Richard heading in the opposite direction. His smirk was barely concealed. By mid-morning, the whispers began. 2 interns avoided her gaze. A compliance clerk looked at her with a mix of pity and discomfort. Richard had clearly started planting the idea that she'd been caught. At 11 o'clock, Samuel sent her a secure message. Footage secured. Shows Collins planting folder at 8:15. Shows you leaving it untouched. She replied with one word. Perfect. The second part of her plan required patience. She knew Richard would want to confront her in person, to savor what he thought was a win. It came sooner than she expected, just after lunch. He stepped into the hallway as she returned from the break room, blocking her path. "Grant, my office. Now." Inside, he closed the door and leaned against it. "I hope you enjoyed your little tour of Cabinet 3 this morning. I was retrieving the file you requested." "That's not what the footage will show," he said, his tone oily with satisfaction. "You opened a restricted folder. That's grounds for immediate termination, maybe even legal action. I'll be generous, resign quietly, and I'll tell HR to keep it off your record." Her micro recorder caught every word. She tilted her head, calm. "And if I don't resign?" His smile widened. "Then you'll never work in finance again." She let the silence stretch, then gathered her things and walked out without a word. At 4 p.m., she met Samuel in the west stairwell. He handed her a drive. "Here's everything. Collins planting the folder, time-stamped, you leaving it untouched, his visit afterward to check if it was gone. And the hallway mic caught him telling HR it was handled." Olivia plugged the drive into her laptop right there on the landing. The footage was crisp, the audio damning. She copied it to 2 encrypted cloud accounts and a portable drive. "This," she said, "is going to be the moment they realize the game has changed." Samuel smiled. "When's the drop?" "Soon," she said. "But first I want him to think he's won. The fall will be harder." The next day, HR summoned her to a disciplinary review in conference room D. Richard was there, along with the director of compliance. A folder sat on the table, the red one. The HR manager cleared her throat. "Olivia, we have evidence you accessed restricted documents without authorization. This is a serious breach." Olivia folded her hands. "May I see the evidence?" Richard slid a printed still image across the table. It showed her leaning toward the cabinet, hand braced on the edge. "That's from the security feed at 9:05 a.m., he said. She examined it, then looked up. "Do you have the preceding footage?" "That's not relevant," the director of compliance said quickly. "It's extremely relevant," Olivia countered. And I happen to have it, along with audio from this room's camera feed that you might not know about. She placed her portable drive on the table. This contains video of Mr. Collins placing that red folder into the cabinet at 8:15 a.m., as well as footage of me leaving it untouched. It also includes a recording of him telling me to retrieve the file and later informing HR it was handled. The room went silent. Richard's face drained of color. That's admissible? Olivia interrupted. Yes. All footage is time-stamped and unaltered. I suggest you consult legal before proceeding. She stood, collecting her drive. If you need me, I'll be at my desk. Back at her workstation, she caught Samuel's eye across the floor. His nod was small but certain. The trap had been set and sprung. Only Richard hadn't realized yet that the consequences would reach far beyond an awkward meeting. For Olivia, this wasn't the climax. It was just the opening move in a much larger endgame. The summons came at 8:45 a.m. sharp. An email from the executive coordinator, subject line in bold. Mandatory staff meeting, conference room A, 9 o'clock a.m. It was addressed to all interns, department heads, HR, and several senior managers. Olivia read it twice. The list of attendees was telling. Richard Collins, head of HR, director of compliance, and 2 board liaisons. This wasn't just a staff meeting, it was a stage. She arrived early. Conference room A was the largest on the 28th floor, a long rectangle with glass walls on 2 sides and blackout blinds pulled tight. At the far end, a massive projector screen glowed with the Hudson Capital logo. A speakerphone sat in the center of the polished table, already connected to the remote participants. Richard stood near the screen, shuffling papers in a practiced performance of authority. He greeted the board liaisons with exaggerated warmth, then made a point of ignoring Olivia as she took a seat halfway down the table. By 9:02, the room was full. Richard cleared his throat. Thank you all for making time. I wish this were under better circumstances, but we have a matter of integrity to address. He turned toward the group. It has come to my attention that one of our interns has accessed restricted company documents without authorization. This breach— Which documents? Olivia's voice was steady, but loud enough to carry. Richard gave a thin smile. The specifics are sensitive. Then you'll need to be specific for this meeting to be valid, she said. Otherwise, this is hearsay. A few heads turned. One of the board liaisons raised an eyebrow. Richard tapped the projector remote. A grainy still image appeared. Olivia in file room B, leaning toward a cabinet. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the moment Ms. Grant accessed a confidential folder labeled M&A Drafts. He let the image linger before continuing. Our security protocols are clear. Unauthorized access to such materials. Olivia leaned forward. Could you pull up the video from 5 minutes before that image? Richard hesitated. That's not relevant. It's critical, she said, her tone even but firm. In fact, I have it with me. She took out a sleek silver flash drive and set it on the table. May I? Richard's jaw tightened. No external drives? It's already been cleared by IT, she said, glancing toward the board liaisons. Perhaps they'd like to see the full context before forming an opinion. The taller liaison, a silver-haired man with the faintest trace of a Boston accent, spoke up. Let her play it. Richard's lips thinned, but he stepped aside. Olivia rose, walking to the podium with the unhurried grace of someone who'd been here before, because she had, years ago, in a different capacity. She plugged in the drive. The projector flickered, and then Samuel's crystal-clear green feed footage filled the screen. 8:15 a.m. Richard enters the file room alone, a red folder tucked under his arm. He opens cabinet 3, places the folder inside, glances toward the hallway, and leaves. 9:05 a.m. Olivia enters, rests her hand on the cabinet edge, glances at the label, then pulls a different folder from a nearby shelf and leaves. The red folder remains untouched. No one spoke. The silence was punctuated only by the hum of the projector fan. Olivia stepped back to her seat. For the record, I never opened that folder, and I believe the footage demonstrates it was placed there intentionally by Mr. Collins. Richard's face was pale but defiant. This proves nothing. You still had proximity to a restricted file. Proximity is not access, Olivia said. But if we want to discuss access... She reached into her bag and pulled out a small device. This is a wireless HDMI transmitter. It often uses it for remote presentations. With the board's permission, I'd like to connect Mr. Collins's laptop to the projector to review the metadata of that file. Richard's head snapped toward her. Absolutely not. But the silver-haired liaison had already nodded. Do it. Olivia pressed a button. On the projector screen, Richard's laptop desktop appeared. Open emails, File Explorer, recent documents. She navigated quickly, her fingers steady on the trackpad. Here's the metadata. File created at 8:12 a.m. yesterday by R. Collins, modified at 8:15 a.m., exactly matching the footage timestamp. That's the first point. She clicked another folder. Sent items. The second point, these are internal emails from Mr. Collins to the Director of Compliance, instructing them to create cause for termination and remove her quietly. Gasps rippled around the table. Richard lunged forward. Stop! She kept scrolling. And here, emails containing racial and gender-based slurs directed at both interns and staff. All time-stamped, all sent from Mr. Collins's authenticated account. The silver-haired liaison's voice was low but cutting. Richard, is this real? Richard stammered. Those could be fabricated. They aren't, Olivia said. They were pulled directly from your machine in real time. And there's more. Attachments labeled Q4 adjustments showing instructions to alter operating margins and depreciation schedules before filing with the SEC. That landed like a thunderclap. The head of HR's hand went to her mouth. The analysts in the room shifted in their chairs, some scribbling notes, others staring openly. Richard tried again. You can't... Yes, I can, Olivia said. Her voice was calm, but resonated with the steel edge of authority. And I have backups on 3 secure servers in case anyone tries to erase this evidence. The silver-haired liaison leaned forward. Meeting adjourned. Richard, you will surrender your laptop to IT immediately. HR, compliance, secure the device, preserve all files, and prepare a preliminary report for the board. Richard's protest was drowned out by the sudden movement of people in the room. Phones coming out. Whispered conversations starting, chairs scraping. Olivia unplugged the transmitter and walked back to her seat. For the first time since she'd stepped into Hudson Capital as an intern, she allowed herself the faintest smile. The shift in the room was tangible. The balance of power had changed. After the meeting, Samuel found her in the elevator lobby. That was... surgical. She shook her head slightly. It's not over. But now they know I'm not a target. They're the ones in the crosshairs. You going to push this to the board? Yes, she said, pressing the button for her floor. And beyond. The elevator doors closed, reflecting her calm, steady gaze. This wasn't just about exposing Richard anymore. It was about dismantling the culture that had allowed him to thrive. The boardroom on the top floor of Hudson Capital was not meant for drama. It was a place of quarterly forecasts, mergers discussed in guarded tones, and decisions sealed with handshakes rather than headlines. But that morning, the tension in the air could have been sliced with a letter opener. The blinds were drawn tight against the late winter glare over Manhattan. A long mahogany table stretched the length of the room, ringed with leather chairs. At the head sat Thomas Whitaker, the chairman of the Hudson Capital Board. To his left and right were the other board members, each with their tablets open, legal pads at the ready. Richard Collins was there too, this time without his easy swagger. His tie was slightly askew, and a fine sheen of sweat glistened at his hairline. Olivia entered without a sound, carrying a single leather portfolio. She took the seat opposite Whitaker. Her navy blazer was buttoned, her hair pulled back, every detail of her appearance signaling control. Whitaker cleared his throat. "Miss Grant, we've reviewed the preliminary report from IT and compliance regarding the evidence you presented yesterday. We found troubling materials." "Troubling is an understatement," murmured board member Elaine Porter, scrolling through a tablet. Whitaker raised a hand. "Before we proceed, we need to understand exactly who you are. Your internship file says you're a graduate applicant from Columbia. That no longer appears to be the full picture." Olivia opened her portfolio and slid a single document across the table. It bore the Grant Holdings corporate seal in deep embossing, alongside her name, Olivia Eleanor Grant, Director of Corporate Ethics and Compliance, Board of Directors. The room stilled. "I am," she said evenly, "the only child of Eleanor Grant, CEO of Grant Holdings. For those unfamiliar, Grant Holdings owns 70% of Hudson Capital's voting shares. I've been embedded here for the last 6 weeks to conduct an unannounced internal audit following multiple whistleblower tips about misconduct at the senior level." Murmurs rippled around the table. Richard's face went paper white. She continued, her voice measured. "This was not a casual observation exercise. It was a targeted investigation. My role as an intern was deliberate, to see how your leadership treats those perceived as powerless. What I've found confirms both cultural toxicity and financial misconduct that pose significant legal and reputational risk to this company." Elaine Porter leaned forward. "Are you prepared to substantiate that in detail?" "Yes." Olivia tapped the portfolio. "This file contains time-stamped footage of attempted entrapment of an employee, orchestrated by Mr. Collins and others. Internal emails containing discriminatory language and directives to target specific employees based on race, gender, and educational background. Instructions to alter operating margins and depreciation schedules in violation of GAAP with intent to mislead investors. Testimony from former employees corroborating a pattern of wrongful termination following internal complaints." Richard slammed a palm on the table. "This is outrageous. She's twisting." Olivia didn't raise her voice, but her words cut clean. "Interrupt me again, Mr. Collins, and I'll add obstruction of an internal ethics investigation to your list of concerns." Whitaker's gaze snapped to Richard. "Sit down." Olivia turned back to the board. "Last night, this information was shared with the SEC under the whistleblower program. They've issued a preliminary summons for Hudson Capital to produce financial statements, internal communications, and all compliance logs from the last 3 fiscal years." That landed like a blow. One of the board members, a former federal prosecutor, leaned back in his chair with a low whistle. "This means," Olivia went on, "that the matter is no longer contained within company walls. It is now a federal inquiry, and as majority shareholder, Grant Holdings has a vested interest in ensuring that Hudson Capital cooperates fully, not to mention that the public will see any delay as an admission of guilt." Elaine Porter set her tablet down. "What are you recommending, Director Grant?"
Immediate suspension of Mr. Collins without pay, pending the outcome of both the internal review and the SEC investigation. Termination of any executive or manager found complicit in discriminatory practices, and a top-to-bottom culture audit conducted by an independent firm with quarterly public reporting on progress. Whitaker exchanged glances with the other board members. "And you believe this will be enough to satisfy the SEC?" Olivia's gaze was unflinching. Satisfy them? No. But it will demonstrate proactive cooperation, which, in federal matters, can be the difference between fines and criminal charges. Richard half rose from his chair. "You can't just walk in here and—" Olivia opened her portfolio again, pulling out a second document. "This is the formal letter from Grant Holdings transferring operational oversight of Hudson Capital's ethics and compliance function directly to me for the duration of the investigation. Effective immediately, Mr. Collins. Your authority over personnel matters is revoked." Gasps around the table. She slid the letter toward Whitaker, who scanned it quickly and nodded. "It's valid." Olivia stood, her voice carrying the calm weight of finality. "I came here under the assumption that truth is the foundation of finance. If I was wrong, then Hudson Capital has no future worth protecting. But if I'm right, and I am, then this is your opportunity to rebuild before the market makes the choice for you." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Elaine Porter spoke. "I move we adopt Director Grant's recommendations." Whitaker looked down the table. "All in favor?" Hands rose, 8 out of 9. Whitaker turned to Richard. "You are suspended, effective immediately. HR will escort you from the premises." Richard's eyes locked on Olivia's. For the first time, the smugness was gone, replaced by something closer to fear. "This isn't over." Her reply was soft, almost pitying. "For you it is." Security arrived. The door closed behind him. When the meeting adjourned, Olivia remained in her chair, watching the blinds sway slightly in the air-conditioned current. The battle had shifted from covert moves in dusty file rooms to open warfare at the highest level, and she had just claimed the first major victory. As she gathered her portfolio, Whitaker approached. "Director Grant, I underestimated you." "That was the point," she said. "And for the record, you can just call me Olivia." The Hudson Yards boardroom was a marvel of modern architecture. Floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides, the Hudson River glinting in the winter sun, and the sprawl of Manhattan unfurling beyond. Normally, it was a place for high-stakes negotiations and polished investor briefings. Today, it was a courtroom without a judge, where evidence would be weighed and verdicts quietly sealed. At the head of the long table sat Thomas Whitaker, chairman of the board, flanked by Elaine Porter and the other voting members. Along the right wall, senior department heads waited, their faces a mix of apprehension and curiosity. On the opposite wall, a large LED display stood ready, its black surface humming faintly. Olivia stood at the far end, her leather portfolio closed in front of her. She had dressed deliberately, black-tailored suit, white silk blouse, hair swept into a knot that spoke of precision and restraint. Every detail was calculated, not for vanity, but to signal she was here not as an intern, nor even as a daughter of power, but as a corporate officer holding the fate of the company in her hands. Whitaker tapped the table lightly. "Director Grant, the floor is yours." She nodded once and stepped to the display, clicking a small remote. The screen lit with the first slide. Hudson Capital, Internal Ethics Review, Preliminary Findings. "I will be direct," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "This company faces 2 crises, one of numbers and one of culture. Separately, each could damage us. Together, they could destroy us. The first half of her presentation was surgical. Slide after slide, she laid out the evidence. Emails from Richard Collins directing alterations to operating margins and depreciation schedules in violation of GAAP. Ledger comparisons showing discrepancies between internal drafts and SEC-filed statements. Time-stamped metadata tying the changes directly to specific executives. Internal chat logs confirming intent to mislead investors ahead of earnings calls. Each point was met with shifting postures, downcast eyes, and the soft scratch of pens against paper. Then she pressed the remote again. The header changed. Culture audit. Phase 1 findings. This, she said, is where the numbers meet the people. A short video began to play. The first face on screen was a middle-aged black woman in a simple blouse, seated in her kitchen. I worked in accounting for 8 years. I loved my job, but after I reported expense irregularities, I started getting written up for things that were never an issue before. Being late when I was early, missing deadlines I had already met. 3 months later, I was gone. The next clip showed a young Asian American man. They said I didn't fit the culture. I guess culture means not questioning why every senior hire looks the same and plays golf with the same 3 executives. Then a Latina woman, voice trembling. When I asked why my promotion was delayed, my manager said, "We need someone with the right pedigree. I have a master's in finance from NYU. Apparently that wasn't the right pedigree." Olivia let the silence stretch for a beat after the video ended. These, she said, are 5 of the 37 testimonies collected so far. All former employees, all with consistent accounts of discriminatory practices, retaliatory terminations, and intimidation. These are not isolated incidents. They are a pattern. Elaine Porter's voice was quiet but hard. And Collins's emails confirm he was aware. Olivia nodded. More than aware. He directed some of it. She clicked to the next slide, a chart showing staff turnover over the last 5 years, segmented by demographics. The lines told a clear story. Sharp drop-offs among minority hires after 2 years, contrasting with steady retention among white counterparts. This chart, Olivia said, was compiled from your own HR data. It's the picture of a company bleeding talent, not because it can't find it, but because it refuses to keep it. Whitaker's fingers drummed on the table. What do you propose? She took a breath. Immediate reforms. Effective today. I recommend establishment of an independent ethics oversight committee reporting directly to the board. Mandatory anti-discrimination and ethics training for all employees, including executives. Anonymous reporting channels monitored by third-party auditors. Quarterly culture audits with results shared internally and summarized for shareholders. Reinstatement offers to qualified former employees who were wrongfully terminated, beginning with those in the video. Murmurs spread through the board members. One asked, "Won't reinstating them expose us to lawsuits?" "It will reduce them," Olivia replied. "Lawsuits are already coming. This shows good faith. And it brings back skilled people we drove away." She stepped closer to the table. And one more thing. This reform cannot be cosmetic. If we treat it like a PR bandage, the SEC will see it, the press will smell it, and the market will punish it. We have to mean it. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the HVAC. Then Whitaker spoke. And the financial risk? Olivia pressed the remote. The final slide appeared. Cost of reform versus cost of collapse. On the left, projected expenses for compliance measures, settlements, and reinstatements, significant but finite. On the right, projected losses from investor flight, legal judgments, and brand damage if reforms were not implemented, staggering. This is the math,
Olivia said. The numbers make the choice for you. Elaine Porter broke the silence. I've been on this board for 10 years. I've never seen a case presented this clearly. Director Grant is right. We do this now, or we don't recover. Whitaker's gaze swept the table. All in favor of adopting Director Grant's recommendations, raise your hands. Every hand went up, unanimous. Olivia closed her portfolio. Then we begin today. I'll coordinate with HR and legal to draft the reinstatement offers. The Ethics Oversight Committee should be staffed within 2 weeks, and I want the first culture audit scheduled for next month. She turned toward the far wall, where the LED screen had gone dark. One last thing. She clicked the remote, and the video of the testimonies replayed for a final 30 seconds. We rebuild this company, she said quietly. Not because the law forces us to, but because we choose to be better than what we've been. The meeting adjourned in near silence, the weight of the moment settling over everyone. As she left the room, Samuel Ortiz was waiting in the corridor. How'd it go? Olivia allowed herself a small, genuine smile. We got them all on record. Now we hold them to it. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. Not in the press, at least not yet, but within Hudson Capital's glass walls where rumors could sprint faster than any formal memo. The email came from Chairman Thomas Whitaker. Subject line in bold caps. Board decision. Ethics and compliance actions effective immediately. By 8:15 a.m., every employee had read the opening paragraph. Effective immediately, Richard Collins is terminated for cause, with no severance or post-employment benefits, following substantiated violations of company policy, ethical standards, and federal regulations. Additional disciplinary actions will be announced as the internal review concludes. By 8:30, Richard's office was stripped bare. Security escorted him through the main lobby under the watchful eyes of employees who had once avoided his gaze. This time, they didn't look away. They looked at him. Some with satisfaction, some with quiet relief. Olivia watched from the 28th floor atrium. She didn't smile. This wasn't about gloating. It was about closure. Richard's departure was a necessary act, but it was only the first step in delivering real justice. At 10 o'clock a.m., the board reconvened for a closed-door session to finalize the next wave of decisions. Olivia stood at the head of the table again, this time with a much slimmer portfolio. The investigation's heavy lifting was done. Now came implementation. Item 1, Whitaker said, glancing at the agenda. Disciplinary actions for those complicit. Elaine Porter spoke up. The head of HR and the director of compliance both knowingly participated in the attempted entrapment of Director Grant. They also failed to investigate multiple discrimination complaints. The vote was quick and unanimous. Both terminated for cause, effective immediately. Item 2, Whitaker continued. Restitution and reinstatement. Olivia took the floor. We've identified 7 former employees with strong wrongful termination claims who are willing to return under the new oversight structure. Reinstating them sends a powerful message that we not only acknowledge the harm done, but actively work to repair it. One board member asked, and the others? Some have moved on, some are in different industries, Olivia replied, but every single one will receive a formal written apology and a settlement offer, along with a letter clearing their employment record of any fabricated performance issues. Again, the vote was unanimous. By noon, HR, now staffed with interim leadership, was drafting reinstatement offers. It was scrubbing systems for residual access from terminated executives. Legal was preparing compliance reports for the SEC, demonstrating that Hudson Capital was acting decisively and transparently. The reforms Olivia had outlined in Chapter 8 began rolling out immediately.
The Independent Ethics Oversight Committee was formed, with Olivia as interim chair. Anonymous reporting channels went live on the intranet, monitored by a third-party firm. The first mandatory ethics and anti-discrimination training sessions were scheduled for the following month. The atmosphere inside the building began to shift. People who had kept their heads down for years were suddenly speaking up in small, cautious ways, sharing ideas in meetings, pushing back against poor decisions, even just making eye contact in the hallways. That afternoon, Olivia called Samuel Ortiz to her office. He stepped in, still wearing his security uniform, but there was a subtle difference in the way he carried himself. He wasn't just a guard today. He was a man who'd been part of changing the course of an entire company. "Close the door," Olivia said. She handed him a crisp white folder. He opened it slowly. Inside was a formal letter from the board, commending him for his role in preserving critical evidence during an active ethics investigation. Beneath that, an offer, a promotion to security operations supervisor, with a substantial salary increase and full benefits. Samuel looked up, his voice quiet. "I wasn't expecting this." "I know," Olivia said. "That's why you deserve it. You didn't help me because you thought there'd be something in it for you. You did it because it was right." He glanced back at the folder, then at her. "Thank you. Really." She leaned back in her chair. "There's more." She slid a second document across the desk. It bore the Grant Holdings seal, the Ortiz and Rodriguez Scholarship Fund. Samuel read aloud, "To provide annual scholarships for underprivileged students pursuing degrees in finance, ethics, or corporate law, named in honor of Samuel Ortiz and Maria Rodriguez, whose integrity and quiet courage exemplify the values this industry needs most." His hands stilled on the paper. "Maria Rodriguez, the night cleaning supervisor?" Olivia nodded. "She's been with Hudson Capital for 22 years. When I first started here undercover, she gave me directions to the file room without asking questions. I later found out she's helped more people in this building than most of its executives. This fund is named for both of you because you represent the kind of legacy I want to leave here." Samuel blinked a few times, clearly moved. This is going to change lives." "That's the point," Olivia said softly. By late afternoon, news of the scholarship fund was already circulating internally. Some employees reacted with curiosity, others with genuine admiration. For the first time in years, Hudson Capital's break room chatter wasn't about who was getting pushed out. It was about opportunity. The board officially approved the fund that evening, allocating an initial $2 million from the company's discretionary philanthropic budget, with a commitment to renew annually. Applications would open the following semester, prioritizing first-generation college students and those from marginalized communities. 2 days later, the SEC sent formal acknowledgement of Hudson Capital's cooperation. While the investigation was ongoing, the tone of the letter was markedly less severe than the initial summons, an unspoken recognition that the company's swift reforms were making an impact. Olivia knew better than to think they were out of the woods. Federal investigations moved slowly, and every step would be scrutinized. But she also knew they had done something rare, turned the tide before the current dragged them under. On Friday morning, a reinstated employee named Marisol Vega returned to the 18th floor. She had been wrongfully terminated 2 years earlier after questioning expense irregularities. Now, she walked back in wearing a simple navy dress and a look of quiet defiance. Olivia was waiting at her desk. "Welcome back," she said warmly. Marisol smiled. "I never thought I'd set foot in here again. But it feels different." "It will be," Olivia promised. By the end of that week, Hudson Capital was a different place. Not perfect, not yet,
but transformed enough that people noticed. Department heads were more cautious with their words. Meetings ended with more than just nods. They ended with commitments. And the hallways felt just a little less tense. Justice had been delivered, not just in the form of firings and policy changes, but in the restoration of dignity to those who had been wronged. For Olivia, this chapter wasn't about triumph. It was about putting things back where they belonged, even if some damage could never be fully undone. As she stood by the west-facing windows that Friday evening, watching the sun sink over the Hudson River, Samuel stepped up beside her. "You ever think," he said, "that this is just the beginning?" Olivia smiled faintly. "It always is. 6 months can change a company, or break it." For Hudson Capital, the transformation was visible from the street level. The lobby no longer had the sterile chill it once did. The marble gleamed, yes, but so did the faces of the people moving through it. Receptionists greeted employees by name. Security guards were treated like colleagues, not props in dark suits. The 28th floor, once thick with unspoken tension, now buzzed with the hum of purposeful work. Cubicles had given way to collaborative spaces, glass partitions letting in light where shadows used to rule. The new Ethics Oversight Committee held open office hours every Thursday, and people actually showed up, not to lodge complaints, but to offer ideas. Retention numbers told the same story. Turnover among minority hires had dropped by 40%, and the company had filled more than half of its new management positions with internal promotions rather than outside hires. The first quarterly culture audit conducted by the independent firm Olivia had hired came back with what the board called the most encouraging results in a decade. Employees reported feeling safer, more respected, and more likely to see a long-term future with the company. And there was the Ortiz and Rodriguez Scholarship Fund. In its first round, it had awarded 10 full scholarships, 5 in finance, 3 in corporate law, and 2 in business ethics. Samuel Ortiz had personally handed out the acceptance letters at a small ceremony in the Hudson Capitol atrium, his voice steady but eyes bright with emotion. Maria Rodriguez had cried openly when her name was announced as co-honoree, the entire room standing to applaud. On a mild spring morning, Olivia stepped out of the elevator onto the 18th floor to find Marisol Vega in the middle of a brainstorming session with a team of analysts. Charts and market projections covered the whiteboard, and the energy in the room was almost electric. "Morning, Director Grant," Marisol called with a smile. "We're about to beat last quarter's growth forecast by another 2%. Olivia leaned against the doorway. "I'd say that's a better use of your time than fighting off fake performance write-ups." The room laughed, genuinely, not nervously. Not everything was perfect, of course. There were still occasional flare-ups, managers who resisted the changes, employees who grumbled about the new accountability measures. But they were isolated incidents now, quickly addressed instead of quietly ignored. Olivia knew the SEC investigation still hung in the background like a distant storm cloud. Yet even there, progress was clear. The agency had acknowledged Hudson Capital's cooperation and reduced the scope of its inquiry to a narrower time frame, focusing on the individuals already removed from the company. The stock price, which had dipped in the early days of the scandal, had not only recovered, but surpassed its pre-investigation high. Investors responded well to transparency and even better to a culture that was clearly driving results. By June, CNBC had requested an exclusive interview. The network wanted the full arc, the undercover investigation, the cultural overhaul, the measurable financial gains. Olivia agreed on one condition, that the segment also feature employees, not just executives. On the day of the interview, the studio lights in the 28th floor conference room were warm, but not oppressive. The Hudson River shimmered in the background through clean glass. Across from Olivia sat veteran anchor Daniel Keene, known for his incisive questions and calm demeanor. "Director Grant," he began, "6 months ago, Hudson Capital was facing both a federal inquiry and a complete crisis of confidence. Today, it's being hailed as one of Wall Street's most improved workplaces. How did that happen?" Olivia smiled faintly. "By remembering that numbers and people aren't separate things. We fixed the books and the culture at the same time because one can't survive without the other." Keene leaned forward. "Your undercover role has become something of a legend in the industry. Why go to such lengths?" "Because culture isn't what's written in the employee handbook," she said. "It's how the most vulnerable person in the building is treated when no one is watching. I wanted to see that for myself, and unfortunately, I did. But I also saw the people who were willing to help even when it was risky. They're the reason this turnaround worked." The camera cut briefly to a montage. Samuel Ortiz handing out scholarship letters, Maria Rodriguez hugging one of the recipients, Marisol at the whiteboard with her team, a group of interns laughing over lunch in the new open cafeteria space. Keene's voice came from off-screen. "If you had to sum it up in one sentence?" Olivia looked directly into the camera. "Real power isn't about protecting yourself, it's about protecting those who don't have a voice." After the interview wrapped, Olivia walked down to the atrium. A few employees stopped her to talk, some to share ideas, others simply to say thank you. Samuel caught up to her near the entrance. "CNBC, huh? You're going national now." "It's not about me," she said. "It's about making sure people know change is possible, and that it's worth it." He grinned. "Well, for what it's worth, this place feels lighter." Maria Rodriguez joined them, carrying a stack of supply boxes. "And cleaner," she said with a wink. "But that might just be me." They all laughed. That Friday, the week ended not with tension and exhaustion, but with something closer to community. On the rooftop terrace, a space that had once been reserved for executives, employees from every department gathered for a casual mixer. There was music, simple catered food, and the sound of people actually enjoying each other's company. Olivia stood off to the side for a moment, watching. Marisol was deep in conversation with a group of interns. Samuel was showing photos of his nephew's graduation to a circle of analysts. Maria was leading an impromptu salsa dance lesson near the far railing. Elaine Porter appeared at her elbow. "You did it," she said softly. "We did it," Olivia corrected. "And now we have to keep doing it." Elaine raised her glass. "To keeping it." They clinked glasses, the clink ringing clear against the backdrop of the city. As the sun dipped behind the Hudson River, casting the sky in streaks of gold and rose, Olivia felt something she hadn't allowed herself in months. Peace. The battle had been long, and the scars, both hers and the company's, would never vanish completely. But in their place was something stronger. A culture that valued integrity, a team that valued each other, and a future that, for once, looked not just profitable, but worth building. She took one last look at the people around her, at the light spilling over the rooftop, at the river reflecting the colors of a city that had tested her in every way. It was not a perfect ending, but it was the right one. And that brings us to the end of Olivia Grant's journey. From the intern, nobody wanted to the woman who rewrote the rules of an entire company. It was a fight for truth, for fairness, and for the people whose voices were nearly silenced. If you've stayed with me until now, thank you. Truly. Stories like this matter because they remind us that change is possible when courage meets opportunity, and that integrity is worth protecting, no matter the cost. If you enjoyed this story and want to be here for more journeys of resilience, redemption, and hope, make sure to hit that subscribe button.
We've got many more stories to share, and I'd love for you to be part of them. Until next time, take care of yourself and never underestimate the power of standing up for what's right.